Let's move on and talk about knife crime in this country because, as we know, there's a shocking incident yesterday in Tewkesbury School. A teenager has been arrested. The teacher is in hospital with suspected stab wounds. This teenage boy in custody was arrested. This all happened at a secondary school yesterday. The school was put into lockdown. Pupils were then sent home. How absolutely terrifying for the pupils at that school. Joining us now, Danny Shaw, crime and policing commentator. Good morning.
Good morning, David.
It's extraordinary. Yet again, another story about knife crime, another story about kids. It's a rite, we talked about this yesterday, a rite of passage almost, to brandish these insane knives, whether it's to attack someone or in self-defence. And this can't go on.
It's a really horrifying incident. We don't know the full circumstances of it, and I should just say at the moment that a young person is in custody and on suspicion of attempted murder, but no charges have been brought at the moment. The good news is that the teacher who was stabbed in the corridor apparently received one stab wound. I think the latest is that the teacher has actually been discharged from hospital, so clearly the injuries were not that serious. That's the good news about this. It was clearly very frightening for the pupils concerned. There was a sort of lockdown in the school. One teacher apparently barricaded himself and his class into the classroom using some sort of cupboard to wedge against the door to make sure that the attacker couldn't get in. And there was a manhunt, and eventually the alleged perpetrator was found, I think, 5 miles away. So really frightening incident. There are huge police resources being called. We don't know what's behind it, David. I should say incidents like that are rare, but you're absolutely right to point out as well that although incidents like that are rare, there is a real problem of knife crime in some cities and some areas across the country. We know that in some areas, for example, in London, Birmingham, Manchester and Liverpool in particular, you know, the problem of knives, carrying knives, is much worse than perhaps in some other locations. And it appears from the latest figures that have been gathered by the Daily Mail that sentencing appears to be getting more lax. And that, I think, is clearly a concern.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's absolutely staggering that a record number of repeat knife offenders are being spared jail. You can rack up something like 45 convictions. I mean, it's just ridiculous. What message are we sending out when we let people go with a sort of smack on the wrist?
I can't believe that someone's got 45 convictions for knife offences and has been spared jail. I think that may be, this is a figure in the Daily Mail, someone with 45 convictions for a number of offences. But I think the broader point is that I have looked at the figures the Daily Mail has got, and I've also looked at some of the other government figures around this, that what we saw sort of 5 or 10 years ago was a ratcheting up of the sentencing regime, with more people going to prison. There were new laws introduced for repeat offenders, which basically said to the courts, if someone's been caught with a knife more than once, then the expectation is that they should go to jail. But there are exceptions to that, and it looks like the courts are using those exceptions more. And so repeat offenders are not going to prison.
So surely that needs to be tightened up. Shouldn't, I mean, the law is the law. I mean, you're right, since 2017, repeat knife offences by anyone over 16 should mean jail. The fact is, there shouldn't be any exceptions, or very rare exceptions, shouldn't there?
I agree with you, David, and I think that there really needs to be a review to understand why that is happening, why people, particularly repeat offenders, are not going to prison for this. The overall custody rate has decreased from about 38% to 30% in the last few years. I think that's really worrying. It may be because, firstly, some people are being remanded into custody before sentencing for long periods, and so the judge is taking that into account and saying, well, you've already been in custody for 4 or 6 months, I'll give you a suspended sentence or a community sentence instead. And it may be that because of court delays and backlogs, the cases are taking so long to come before the courts that that's being taken into account by the judges as well. But we need to have an investigation into this to understand why. And in the meantime, I think you're right. The message needs to go out. If you're caught with a knife, if you're a repeat offender, the expectation is you will go to prison, because there has to be a deterrent effect.
Danny, very good to talk to you. Danny Shaw, crime and policing commentator.